There. Welcome to Bible/Chat. Gus, Kevin, hello.
Hello, how are you?
I feel like I just did this. How
We
are
had a
you?
little technical difficulty, and when I say technical difficulty, I mean technically it was difficult to get the chat started. I want to just we're going to do a quick introduction of the Book of Exodus
Yeah.
Cool.
for the people. We're covering this book in
Great.
group. Exodus is one of those books, maybe you know, in the Old Testament that has sort of has lore about it just a little bit
Yeah.
because it's like, oh man, that's a tough book to study. I think all three of us have found it very encouraging so
Yeah.
far,
Definitely.
as much as we've studied it so far.
Mhm.
And I want to just maybe begin by asking you guys, uh, to frame Exodus in the Pentateuch for me. Let's start
Okay.
there. We'll look at something big. How does Exodus fit in with the writings of Moses? Obviously, it's written by Moses. The
Yeah.
Exodus happens in 1446 AD, BC. So we're date and author. We're not going to worry about, but like frame it inside of the Pentateuch for us. Kevin, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think one thing that's helpful in the commentary as a reference point is just one word themes of the books. So you take Genesis, story of a family, think genetics, just obviously like starting with Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Eve's the mother of all the living. We're talking about the seed line, all of that going forward. So you get all the families, the genealogies, things like that.
Yeah.
That family, obviously God's covenant is made with Abraham and his descendants after him. God is binding himself to that family line. You have the story of Jacob, the story of his sons with Joseph going to Egypt. We're starting to kind of bleed into Exodus a little bit. Joseph goes to Egypt. The brothers come. They reunite, obviously, but then the people relocate to Egypt.
Yeah.
However, what has already happened is God has promised land in Canaan to Abraham and his descendants.
Right.
And so he's promised them a city. Hebrews 11 talks about that. But he's going to bring them out of the land in order to make that family into a nation.
Yeah.
And bring that nation back and give them authority over that land, basically. So you have the family in Genesis. Then it leads to Exodus, which is the story of a nation. Now it begins, Exodus, you can kind of track it that way. It's the swing from the family line, which is mentioned right in chapter 1.
Yeah.
And then it goes to where the family is becoming ginormous, a huge unwieldy problem for Pharaoh.
Yeah.
He's trying to control them. But then you have God coming in and saying, no, actually, this is my people. Let my people go. And so then he breaks the back of Pharaoh's will,
Yeah.
takes them out, moves them to Sinai, enacts them basically as a nation, gives them all the laws and things. And then if you pause history for a moment, you have Leviticus, which is
Yeah.
the story of the priesthood, which highlights that need for holiness in relating to God. And then continue the historical timeline with Numbers. You have this generation which completely fails
Yeah.
in the wilderness due to unbelief, which would be a main theme for that book, unbelief. So you have family, nation, priesthood, unbelief. And then the second generation begins, and Moses is writing Deuteronomy to equip that generation to go
Yeah.
into the land.
Yeah.
And so the words there were New Hope.
Yeah.
So you kind of have this flow of,
Like Star Wars.
yes,
Yeah.
Star Wars, New Hope. So Empire Strikes Back coming
Yeah.
later. But yeah, lots of stuff that's kind of the flow. And it's all about how God is going to bring his people into the land,
Yeah.
beginning in Joshua and things. But you start to see all the nuts and bolts of how nations need to work with holiness and all these different issues that aren't in place. And so it's a huge book to teach us what we need in order to relate with God, which is why Torah means direction. And
Yeah.
so everything is direction for us.
Oh, super helpful.
So
That's awesome. Okay, so so we have this flow of thought from essentially like a promise of a gospel. You have a seed line that's protected.
mhm,
You have a family, and then a nation, and then that nation's going to relate to God, and then the nation fails, obviously, which results in this new hope that's going to go into the land. That's the whole Pentateuch, actually.
mhm.
Super helpful. So if Exodus is the story of a nation, Gus, is there a verse in Exodus that identifies what God is doing with the nation?
I don't know. What do you think about Exodus 6:7?
Wow. Go ahead.
I'm just stabbing at it. Um, it says this: Then I will take you. This is God speaking, for my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And this is kind of the idea that this is the guarantee that Israel is going to know that God is who He says He is,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And they're going to have a covenant together. They're going to spend all this. There's all that covenantal language there, and then this theme gets picked up even later on, constantly, over and over again. Like, you are my people, and I am your God.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, and even with other imageries, like, you know, like I'm the shepherd and you are the sheep. Even picked up by Jesus later, even picked up by Peter in First Peter, right?
Yeah,
This idea
totally.
of like, that God is going to be our God, and,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and we are the sheep,
Yeah.
um,
We're his people.
and we're His people.
Yeah, that's super helpful. So that verse sort of identifies then the way that Exodus is structured. So you have the departure out of Egypt, that gets them to Mount Sinai,
Yeah.
and then at Mount Sinai he becomes their God. He gives them
Exactly.
the institutes of the covenant, so that he's able to say like, now look, I am now your God.
Yeah.
You're my people. The people say, he says, will you obey?
Yeah.
And the people say, yes, we will. You will be our God, right? So they affirm that. This, as Kevin mentioned, this generation is unbelieving.
Yeah.
What's the point? Like, what is God's point in an unbelieving group of people making this covenant effectively for all the generations to follow? Like, what is God doing there in terms of that structure?
I think there's a couple of reasons, but I think the main reason, one of them, is to show them that they're unable to do it without Him. I mean, we saw even in the very get-go with Genesis, right? This is why Genesis is so important, because you have the story, a cyclical story repeating itself, where God is reaching out, and man, it's like, I'm good, thanks. Like, we're good, thank you. And He makes a covenant that they know they can't keep.
Yeah.
So far, all the covenants have been unilateral, right?
Yeah.
God is going to do whatever. And this way, now there's a covenant that's going to be a bilateral covenant, right? Where God is going to make some stipulations and they have to obey.
Yeah.
But they won't be able to obey. So number one, I think one of the main reasons, they need something. Something is missing, and we find out later on it's a spirit in their heart. But something is missing, and they're not going to be able to respond to any of this. And then you see what happens when they get on the other side of the Jordan. They can't even finish what God started for them and basically serve them on their lap. They're kind of, sorry for using a soccer analogy, but it's like being in front of the goal. The goal is empty, no goalie, and you're supposed to kick it in, and they kick it out.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's bad.
It couldn't have gotten any easier.
Yeah.
The Dutch have a good song.
Yeah, they Dutch have a good soccer team. And so it's like it should have been easy in the sense.
Yeah.
They don't have the spirit, so they can't do this, and then eventually they're going to end up in captivity.
Yeah.
Because of this cyclical thing. It doesn't mean that they're not faithful people. There are faithful people
During that time.
During that time, and during Genesis and Exodus, and all the way to now.
Yeah.
They're faithful people.
But the nation at large is unfaithful.
And it will be unfaithful until the Spirit is poured on them.
Continue to be that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's helpful. Like, God is calling them to something that He knows they're not able to do. He's calling them to be a nation, and there's a lot of bells and whistles that go to that, especially with being His nation. Like it says in Exodus 19:6, "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." It's like, wow. So God's blessing them with that role, and yet that should have led them to say, "We cannot do this apart from you," and be humbled by that. And some of them start treating the law like a ladder, where they're like, "Oh, we just climb each rung and get to be with God and whatever." But like it says in Galatians 3:24, the law became a tutor to lead us to Christ. And so it shows us where we cannot obey, and it is a teaching device. Again, Torah meaning direction, where it's like, okay, this is the direction where God is actually taking an entire people and saying like, jump this high, and they can't, and they're like, and it's just showing their hardness of will to be like, well, we're going to try again, and it's like, actually you should lean on the Lord, for everything, to Gus's point of like, you can't kick a ball into an open goal without God. So by and large, that's really an important point. Another important point with that, like calling them to be a nation with Exodus, the first time in the present tense that salvation language is used is in Exodus. And so it's helpful to realize like God is laying the groundwork for how to understand what salvation is by this outward physical stuff. And it's like, okay, I will save you from Egypt out of the hands of a tyrant to be my people. I'll do that nationally. But you actually do need to be saved physically or like spiritually also in your soul. But this becomes like language for what salvation looks like. Similarly with Gus and I talked about Hebrews 9 with the tabernacle and all of
Yeah.
that. It's like that outward symbol and ritual system is a teaching device for what should help us understand, what needs to happen spiritually. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
outward stuff like this. Like
Totally.
a nation can't exist apart from God in it. But God puts those forms there and is like, look, you can't fill them because
Yeah.
you don't have a heart
Yeah.
to do this. So,
Yeah. Which is interesting. That's how Deuteronomy ends.
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
God's got to give you a heart.
Yeah.
And I know that. And you're
Yeah.
going to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is amazing that Moses would close this
Yeah.
huge text
Yeah.
with like,
Super encouraging.
can't
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
You're all
Yeah.
failure.
Yeah.
Which is helpful in one sense because you see the seed pointing,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
It's like, hey, there's got to be one who comes who doesn't
Yeah.
fail.
Mhm.
So, two questions. One is a yes or no question. I want you both to answer
Okay.
it. Is God done with the nation of Israel? Is this covenant ended? And if so, does that mean God has no further promises for the nation of Israel? Yes or no?
He's not done with Israel. No.
Good.
He has further promises to fulfill for Israel.
Those aren't yes or no questions. You guys. Oh, no, it's just kidding. You're good.
There
you're
was
good.
there was a double negative in there.
It was a
so,
complex
yeah.
question.
Yeah, it was like the
I
way you
really-
asked it.
Yeah.
I was like, am I keeping my job? Yes or no? And it's like it.
Okay, and then last thing, since we're already a little over time, what we said we would do. Oh my, yeah. Okay, if you
If
could
you were at
give-
this island,
if you no,
take Israel with you.
No. If you could give one tip on studying a book like Exodus, what would the tip be? And just rapid fire, what would be your tip, Gus?
Read it.
Mm.
Read it and read it.
Yeah, yeah.
This is what I was telling my care group last night. Just do
Keep
the
reading.
reading. You don't need to read the commentary. Just read the passage over and over again
Yeah.
that week and get familiarized with that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So see the text itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and the commentary can be helpful.
Yeah, the commentary is helpful.
That's
but,
secondary.
But
Mhm.
the text is the most important part.
Good.
Yeah.
Super
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing and read it, realizing everything builds on itself as it goes. So it snowballs as it keeps going. So like there's stuff with Moses in chapter 3. He goes to Sinai.
Yeah.
And he's trying to do callbacks and be like,
Yeah.
I was here first.
Yeah.
The, the burning bush was there. It's all very like small form stuff,
Yeah.
and he has to take off his sandals and like all this stuff.
Yeah, it's holy
and then
ground, yeah.
and then later the nation comes there, and
Yeah.
it's like so it when you understand the early things and how it leads to bigger things, that's a lot of you get a lot of
Same shape.
ease there. Same shape, same thing. You get a lot of that. So
That's
yeah,
helpful.
stuff like
That's
that's
good.
helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good.
What would you say?
I always encourage people read the Old Testament with the New Testament in the back of your mind all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
It's
there
helpful.
are things in Exodus where it's like God was angry at them.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm going to kill them and start over with you, And obviously he remains faithful, and Moses talks him out of it in God's providence. But that language can sometimes we can sometimes read ourselves into the text and say
Absolutely.
like, oh, that's how God feels about me. But this is a bilateral covenant, like you mentioned, and what we have in Christ is the actual seed who fulfills all of this stuff. So we actually have all of this stuff fulfilled already. So as you're reading it, I think like always, in one sense, like have your new covenant
Mhm.
jacket on, like the flak jacket of the new covenant, so you can hear this stuff and say, okay, I see what he's doing with Israel. Thank goodness I'm safe in Christ. So that'd be my one.
That's
tip.
great.
Great.
Yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much. Great
Thank you.
introduction.
Thank you.
Hopefully, this is a great care group year. We'll do a few more of these, hopefully, Lord willing, as we go through the book. So keep walking through it.
Yeah.
All right.
Sweet.
Very good. Well, hey, thank you so much. And if you have questions on this or any other topic, you can always email us at info@faithbibleoc.org.